Everyone, welcome to Manly Convos. If you haven't listened to any of our podcasts or episodes before, just to give you some context, I'm Corey Cummins. I'm the founder of Manly Convos. And the reason why I started this is to destigmatize men's mental health. And we're doing this in two ways. One, we're having conversations with men who have gone to therapy and have experienced the power of what it can do, and also talking to mental health professionals about specific topics associated to men. Now, today is actually going to be a little bit different. Normally, I'm the one interviewing people, and I've actually already interviewed Eric before. And Eric is a very close friend of mine. And Eric came up with a really good idea of that he should interview me, which I thought was a great idea. So today we're going to actually flip it, and Eric is going to take control and take ownership of today's episode, which I'm really excited about. So yeah, Eric, do you want to give a quick introduction to yourself, real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Good morning. My name is Eric. I'm probably one of Corey's oldest friends from New York, at least now that he's in. Well, I try to say too many things. Let's start that over. Here's my intro. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Eric Ruiz. Corey's a dear friend of mine, and I'm really excited that he's asked me to come back to the show and take me up on my idea for us to switch the script a little bit. I work in tech. My background is in business development. I'm also the author of Blackout Wednesday, a short story about coming home. So if you need a quick read and you ever thought to yourself, hey, Superbad really needs a sequel, check out the book. And I'm excited to, talk to Corey a bit today about his journey with, through therapy, through mental health. When he and I met in New York, he was one of the folks who really encouraged me to take that step. I was going through a difficult time in my life at that point. And Corey was one of the friends I confided in, and he encouraged me to take the next step, see a professional. And it was one of the best decisions I ever made. It helped me work through very complicated emotions, and it eventually helped me be emotionally ready to get married. So all of that was obviously super beneficial for me in my life. And now I'm excited to talk to Corey about his journey and see how I can help all you fine listeners out there.
Yeah, no, thanks for doing this and kind of flipping the switch with me. So it'll be interesting to see being on this side of the table.
Yeah. So should we just go ahead and get started? Should we talk about the Arsenal match, Brexit? What other topics you want to cover today?
Well, there's an Arsenal match happening. If I open up my balcony doors, I can actually hear the fans screaming if there's a score, or if they're not happy. So, but unfortunately, I haven't decided to care enough about football living here. So yeah, I know that upsets you, but
Right. No, it's okay, because next time I go visit you, we'll continue the tradition of watching a football match in person. So as long as that's our thing, it's totally
perfect.
cool. Don't watch
No
soccer
problem.
without me. That's the new rule.
No problem. That's actually an easy rule for me to stick by, so it's fine.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, so as I mentioned, then you and I met in New York. It's 2014. I'm going through a sort of a turbulent time professionally, a lot of changes at work, also personally some issues with my parents, and those sort of things were kind of coming to a head for me. And you encouraged me. You said, "Look, man, have you thought about therapy? Here's what it did for me. Here's how I can help you." So I would love, obviously this was a very long time ago. So I would love to get started by really understanding how you got into therapy and how you took the step to take care of your mental health. Can you kind of walk us through what first led you to seek professional therapy?
Yeah. So when I started, it was pretty much when I was 25. My mom, when I was graduating university, not that long after I graduated, she got diagnosed with cancer, and she battled for almost 3 years. And during that time, I had a girlfriend, and she was kind enough to be my support system throughout that experience. And at that time, I always thought that I could handle everything on my own. And she noticed something that I didn't notice in myself, was that I needed to go speak to someone to get help. And she brought it up a bunch of times, and obviously I brushed it off. I was young in age and young mentally and emotionally. And then my mom had a kind of a long journey through cancer. So she, started off in her breast, and she had breast surgery, and she had a mastectomy, and then she had radiation, and then chemo. And she would go through these waves where he thought she was good, and then something else would come up a couple months later. So it was kind of this like up and down roller coaster of kind of experiencing it. And before that, I never really had much hardship as a, growing up as a kid. So this was kind of the first thing I really, had to experience. And so then it was interesting how timing works, but about probably 2 months before my mom got put in hospice, I was like, maybe I should go speak to a social worker. I was like, for some reason, I was like, I'm not going to go to a therapist. I'm going to go to a social worker. and because it didn't sound as intense in my brain or my mind at the time. And I remember I went to her. She was young. She was, I think, around my age, maybe 2 years older than me. And I don't remember the exact question she asked, but she asked a couple questions that kind of just resonated with me. I was like, maybe I should go speak to someone more professional. And also before that as well, not only my girlfriend kind of begging me to go, I also noticed that like my personality was changing a tiny bit with people that I cared about. I would be short with them and things like that, which is, I'm a very straight talker, as you know, but I'm not someone who's usually really short with people. And so then when that happened, funny enough, it's very random. So my SAT tutor that I had in high school, I was still very close with. She was this like, I never understood if she was an SAT tutor. She was very smart, but she was like this hippie woman. So it was like very weird how she got into that profession. And she always had a very dear relationship with my mother. My mother could sometimes be a very misunderstood woman. She really tough Jewish New York woman, and sometimes she didn't know how to actually control her emotions, and she definitely could have used some therapy. But that's we can talk about that later. And so yeah, so then I decided to speak to a therapist. My SAT tutor, actually, I called her and I was like, "Do you know anybody that you'd recommend?" Like the most random person to call and ask, and she recommended David. And David was this old man who lived in New York, has been a therapist for a long time. And I booked a session in with him. And then right when I booked a session in with him, my mom got put in hospice. And so I was like, you know what? I'm gonna hold off on this until my mother passes away, and then I'll start. And that's what I did. So my mom passed, and I think it was maybe a week or two later I started. My mother made a promise to her that I wouldn't let my life be put on hold or put on pause. And so, funny enough, I was switching industries as well. So I was interviewing when my mom before she put in hospice. So all these things were happening at once, and that's kind of what started my first kind of experience into mental health. And I did that for once a week for about 18 to 20 months. And yeah, it was, it made such an incredible difference. I don't think I'd have been able to handle my mother's passing in the way that I did.
Yeah, wow, man. Thank you for sharing that. And again, I know it's been a while, but condolences on your mom. I think she'd be very happy to know that you've kept your promise of living your life, and I think paying, honor her that way by continuing to be, the best version of yourself. Um, and so two questions here. First was in regards to your girlfriend suggesting therapy, did you ever bounce that idea off of, say, your brother, your dad? I'm curious what other people close to you thought of that, or how they maybe endorsed her advice.
At that time, no, I didn't. I didn't talk to anybody about it. I definitely didn't talk to my dad about it because my dad, he comes from the generation that therapy is, why would you go to therapy? And so, because my dad's now 73. When my mother passed, he was 61. So he was born in 1950. So it's just a different generation.
Cold War,
But
man.
yeah, it's interesting. I never really spoke to my brother about going to therapy at the time. And which is surprising that I didn't when I think about it, because my brother and I were really close. My brother had already gone to therapy, but I think because this was just such a different experience, with your mother dying and going through it. My brother was living in Europe at the time, and I was living in New York, and we were just having a different experience, kind of going through it, because I was seeing my mother on a consistent basis in hospital and stuff, and so I didn't really talk to them about it. Obviously, once I decided to go to therapy, I was like, "Hey, I'm going to go to therapy." But my brother was definitely a big proponent of it, and my dad would never say anything negative of it. My dad's like, "Yeah, if this helps you, go for it." But my dad's never, he would have never recommended it.
Interesting. And in regards to David, it sounds like he was a wonderful guide for you. And and something you hear about nowadays is finding like the right fit with your therapist. So did you ever think about seeing someone else just to get like a different point of view? Or I guess what made David such a good therapist that you stuck with him for almost 2 years?
Good question. At the time, I didn't really know what to think about therapy and how to approach it because I didn't really have anybody to talk to about it. And so for me, it just seemed to click. Like when I met him, he was just, I don't know, I just really got on with him. I felt really comfortable with him. And he didn't, I guess all the misconceptions I had of therapy, he kind of, it just like didn't happen when I met him. I was like, oh, this is not what therapy is. And I think it also helped that he had an animal in the house. So he had like a cute cat, and I loved animals. I think that probably helped. And even though the funny thing is the animal wasn't supposed to go in the therapy room, and I kind of was like, come on. And so, but I remember, I think you and I discussed this on our session. I remember you asking me, I didn't have the answer to it, but I remember, I think in the first session, I don't remember exactly what he asked me, but I just remember him, I was talking and then he asked me a question about my mother and life and stuff. And I remember it was just like, walking out, he's like, I'm going to leave you this question. I walked outside and his house or where he did his sessions was on 72 in Central Park, not Central Park West, pretty much the part of the, fuck is how you can tell how long I live in New York, on the West Side Highway, pretty much. So
Yeah.
72nd is Central Park West or whatever the hell it is, who knows. And I remember just standing outside being like, kind of pausing and just really like thinking about what he said to me and being like, oh, uh, maybe I do need to continue with this.
What was his
And
question?
I wish honestly I can remember, but it was, how many years ago was this? I'm 38. That's when I was 25. So it was a while ago.
Yeah, it's like
But
2012 or something.
yeah, but it's, I don't know. I just remember I just felt really comfortable with him and at ease. And for me, that was the most important thing. And he was able to kind of guide me. And I remember there were some key things that he really helped me with. My mother passed away. Some of the things that I really struggled with were one, visual flashbacks. So because my mom was in hospice in our house, and I saw things that like you're not really supposed to see because there were certain things my mother didn't want the people in the hospice care to help her with. Not that they were doing anything wrong, but so I would put like the baby monitor in my room, and when she'd be in a lot of pain, I would get up in the middle of the night, and they tell you you're not supposed to do that. And so I had a lot of like visual flashbacks where I could almost see her kind of next to me. And so he was able to kind of help me work through that. And then the second big thing was, my father starting to date again. And, for me, my father dating was not something that I was against because my father is a great guy. He's a great father, a great husband, all the things, and also a great potential partner to someone else. But obviously it's still not easy to kind of go through it. And there were some issues that my dad and I had when going through it and kind of how it happened. But, I think there was just everybody was going through a tough time, my brother, my dad, everybody. And so he was able to give me the tools to be able to kind of handle it in a little bit more of a mature fashion rather than being like, fuck you, dad, I don't want you to date ever again. And so, which for anybody who's ever lost a parent or parents gotten divorced, which obviously my parents didn't get divorced, but my mom died, which, there's, I guess you could say there's similarities in a way because now you don't have one parent. But the last thing you want is your parents to be alone and to not have companionship if that's what matters to them. And so he was able to help me with those two things, which I think if I didn't have him for that, I think it'd be a very different scenario.
Hmm. And so you start therapy and you're on your journey, you're tackling interviews, switching industries, these changes at home with your father, starting to date again, perhaps even your own relationship with your brother. And one thing I'm curious about is like there's this preconception that you start therapy and everything's just going to be uphill. It's going to be easy, you're going to figure things out. But did you figure, and I'm thinking about Tony Soprano here, by the way, when he goes to therapy, because did you have any like setbacks or did you have any moments while you were in therapy where you were like, what the heck? I thought this was supposed to help me. And right now, I don't feel like I'm in the valley right now. Like, how do I get out of this? Did you ever hit sort of those like low points while you were in therapy? And the reason why I ask is because, when as human beings, I feel like we need something to, like, we have a feeling, we feel a certain way, and we want to assign it, attribute it to something. right? So if I'm feeling down, I'm like, well, it's because I have to go back to therapy, right? Then you go back to
Hmm.
therapy and you start doing all of that, but you still feel that feeling, or you feel a new unpleasant feeling, and you're like, but bro, I'm in therapy. Like, this shouldn't be happening. So now you're looking for something else to blame, so to speak. Did you face any similar, for lack of a better term, setbacks or valleys?
Question. I don't I don't know if I say I would maybe had it that same type of way that you're describing it. There were I think there was a couple things for me where I knew that therapy was having a positive impact. So I was like, okay, like I need to keep doing this no matter what it is. And but I still remember one of the first questions I asked the therapist was, I was like, how long is it going to take me to get over this? And he laughed. He goes, if I had the answer to that question, I'd be a multimillionaire, Corey. And I looked at him and I was like, I remember saying to him, because at the time I think therapy was, I don't know, maybe 120, $150 a session, which is a lot of money. And
Yeah.
also I was lucky. I think my dad helped me pay some of that at the time as well. And I remember saying to him, I was like, I'm paying a lot of money for this shit. I was like, how do you have no answer? And he's like, Corey, he's like, if you do what you're supposed to do, he goes, it will happen with time and going through therapy. And it is one of those things. It is true. But I think to answer your question though, is that there were moments in time where he would give me the tools or help me kind of understand, like how to work through visual flashbacks and how to work through my dad dating and things like that. And even though it gave me the tools, it didn't mean that I was able
The pain
to,
went
and
away. Yeah.
yeah, in the moment, the pain would go away, or I'd be able to actually solve it in that moment. And so there were times where I would get really frustrated about it, where I was like, I'd be driving in the car or something and I would have a flashback and I'd be like, get really, really fucking angry about it. And so I think those are the things for me where it's not that I didn't believe therapy was working. I was more just getting frustrated with myself because I was like, why won't this go away?
Hmm.
And but I think with anything, like these tools are very similar to the tools you learn to do your job, or the tools you learn to have a happy relationship, or the tools you learn at the gym to be flexible or whatever it is. And
Hmm.
it's one of these things that don't happen over time. Like what's the quote? They say you need 10,000 hours to be an expert on something, right?
But
Isn't that
Macklemore said, yeah.
something like that. I do like Macklemore. And
Great album.
yeah. And but like you have to think about it that way. These things, like I'm reading a book, which I was going to tell you about later. I'm starting a new type of therapy called ACT therapy, which is the kind of the next version of CBT, and it gives these tools to like how to help when things come into your head and your brain to kind of look at them and spin them differently. And it's one of those things like you read the book and you try to do it, and it's like, okay, I have to continuously do this until it becomes
Yeah.
second brain. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but those are kind of the things that I struggled with when I first went.
Hmm. And so, would you say that in I know we're friends, so you can assume good intent. I'm not trying to say that one is ever over the loss of a parent.
Hmm.
Um, but what I'm trying to say is that other challenges do arise, right? Your life, as you said, has to continue. You change industries, we go through breakups, we move cities. So, how did sort of like your therapy change depending on what was top of mind for you, mental health wise?
You're asking is like as different things have come up in my life,
Yeah.
how have yeah, it's interesting. So I've actually also changed therapists as well in different stages of my life because I've gone. Usually, I go back to therapy when there's different things that have happened in my life. So, say, I broke up with a girlfriend, or say I had my business and things were really stressful with the business and my business partner. So I've kind of gone at different moments in my life. And when I moved to London, I I was like, I started my own business and it was really stressful. My business partner and I did not have the healthiest of relationships. And again, I started seeing that spilling out into my personal life. So I decided, I was like, okay, I need to go speak to someone again. And so I actually got recommended to a therapist in London. She was great. Her name's Shoshana. And usually she actually deals with people that have like pretty serious things that they're working through. But I got connected to her and she was really interesting. She had a great impact on my life. But this is kind of be a long-winded answer to your question. But the funny thing was actually, I think it was the seventh anniversary of my mother's passing. And I was like, you know what? I really want to call David to like thank him and for him to see how far I've come and how much of an impact he's had. And I called and he didn't answer the phone. Someone answers to the phone, and I was informed that he passed away. And when he was my therapist, he was old, so it wasn't like a crazy thing, but it was like this very sad, also like weird moment where the man who taught me how to handle grief, I was going to contact him and he passed away. And it was like almost like this very weird full coming of circle where the man who had an incredible impact on my life, uh, and gave me the tools on how to understand grief and process grief and look at it differently, is now passed away. And I remember like crying about it, but also remember like weirdly laughing about it at the same time, because I was like, this is just weird how the way the world works. But to kind of fast forward though, is as you were asking, is yeah, for me, I always go back when I see that maybe there's something difficult happening, or if there's something that I just feel like I could be better at, or handle a little bit better in life and things like that. So yeah, I could easily kind of walk you through the different times I went and why. But yeah.
Got it, got it. And so something that's come up for me recently, and I'm curious what you think about it, is I'm having a hard time finding a therapist locally for two
Yeah.
reasons. The first one is a few of the local therapists tend to cater more towards women. Like, oh, I'm only taking female clients right now, that sort of thing, which, I get, whatever. The second one is that, I live in the, out here in the cuts, California, right? Like I'm an hour and a half from San Francisco, an hour from Sacramento, so it's a pretty remote area. So there's already slim pickings when it comes to therapists. So something that has come up repeatedly is a digital video call, phone therapy. And I'm a little hesitant, to be honest with you, just because I think I value the face-to-face rapport. So I'm curious from your point of view in your conversations with other manly men or with other friends in your network, how to think about, in person versus digital versus, other types versus app-based, for example. Do you have a strong point of view on that, or is it just one of those situations of like, hey, whatever's available, just pick one?
It's interesting you say that. Like I've done both. So I've done in person and over Zoom. I prefer in person. I do think there is, the life we live in, we're always on computers and you get Zoom fatigue and call fatigue and all that type of stuff. But I think sometimes, unfortunately, you don't have the ability to make that decision. And so, depending on where you live and all that type of stuff. So I think if Zoom is the only way you can do it, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think if you're going to do Zoom, make sure you turn everything off. So anything that could, any notification or anything like that, like I put my phone in another room, like all of it. But yeah,
Oh, sorry, Corey. 1 second.
I
Arsenal just scored.
was going to say they didn't, because I would have heard them. And so, but yeah, I don't have an exact answer for that. I don't think one is better than the other. I think it just, and also I think actually sometimes I think for people who want to dip their toe into this, I actually think sometimes a Zoom or an app can be a little bit less intimidating, and also a lot easier for it to happen, because it can be difficult to find people near you or in London
Yeah.
or wherever you are, and all these types of things. So for my opinion is like, the less barriers to entry for people to get into it, the better. But I think if you have the ability, where like you and I, you've done therapy for a while, we're like, okay, we know what we're looking for. So if you're able to hold off and really find the thing that works for you that's in person, then do that. But I wouldn't use that as you were kind of saying earlier, don't use that as like really the excuse to not do it.
Yeah, fine, fine. I'll do it, Corey. I'll do it. And so something that I heard you say a few times, right? It's going back to therapy, going back to therapy. Would you ever just stay in therapy, like the way one stays in, let's say, a gym membership?
You say that because I've convinced many people to go to therapy, and I'm sure if any of my friends watch us, they'll laugh because they've heard this discussion many times from me. And I always say that like you shouldn't always have to go to therapy because something wrong is going on.
Hmm.
It's like, as I say, as you rightfully said, you go to the gym to stay fit. And
Stay ready,
most
don't get
people,
ready.
exactly. And you'd be such a good personal trainer. And
Thanks, man.
I think, I think the thing is though, is that it's one of those things like mental health impacts you more than everything else. So you could be going to the gym, eating healthy, doing all of it, but if you're struggling mentally, it's gonna hurt way more than everything else. Now, do I think you need to go to therapy forever, every month? No. But I think it depends on what's going on in life. For me right now, work is really stressful. Snowflake is a really intense place to be. And then also there's some stuff personally, like kind of that I'm working through, which is like, from relationship stuff, I'm like trying to really figure out what do I want in a relationship. And there was, a girl that I thought there was potential for us to get serious. And then it didn't in the way that, was not the easiest way to handle it. And so it's kind of made me, I'm like 38, it kind of made me start to like rethink like, oh, I'm 38. Should I be settled? Should I be married? Should I do all the things that society tells you should be doing? And so for me, I was like, okay, I need to go speak to someone about this because I don't want to like make decisions about my career, about relationships because of something subconscious going on in my mind that might not be fully healthy and fully rational. But obviously, everyone has a lot of the feelings that I'm feeling is the same things that everybody else has, and so I think there's no right answer to that. But I think for me, as I say, like sometimes when things are going maybe not the way you want, if you can use that as a catalyst to work through things, that's usually when you'll have the most impact. So, what I mean by that is like when I've had a breakup with a girlfriend, like there's a girl that I dated for what is it, a year and a half. And, I thought things were going to, kind of progress into the next stage. And then things didn't happen for various reasons. And after we broke up, actually, we found out she was pregnant and decided to not, have the kid. And that really, I was like, you know what, I really need to go speak to someone because I don't want that to really impact me the way that it could. And it obviously had a profound impact on me. And so, I think there's no right or wrong answer to it, but, like who knows, maybe if I had a wife and kids, there's a lot of stress all the time with wife and kids, that, maybe I would have a therapist every month. Cause it's like,
Yeah.
you know what, it's just good to have someone there to talk through the stresses of family life, no matter how healthy it is and how great your relationship is with your wife and kids. This is a lot to handle.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's very well said. And as someone with a wife and kids, it's very rewarding. But as you said, it's challenging. It's life, and it does not hurt. And so another thing I've been curious about is you're an American living in London. I'm sure you and I have discussed some differences culturally and how both cultures work, how both cultures live, what both cultures prioritize. So I'm curious from a therapy standpoint if there are sort of different approaches or different frames that either that both cultures take. And of course, we're generalizing here. Everyone, there are many differences, but for the sake of the question, let's just assume that we're going to take a general POV on both therapies and both cultures.
So it's funny because I have one of my really close friends is Spanish, and it's something her and I always talk about is about mental health in this country and the uh, kind of approach and thoughts and opinions on mental health in this country, but also about therapists in this country. And it's interesting because something that, and again, this is a generalization, but something that we've noticed is that a lot of times therapists here won't push you as hard. They'll kind of just more agree with you, which the funny thing
Oh,
is
interesting.
that that's very like when you think about British culture, that's very like very much British culture. Like British culture is not, it's a non-confrontational society.
Hmm.
And coming from New York, which is a confrontational society, it's definitely was definitely interesting moving here 8 years ago. But I think sometimes here I've seen that I've had friends go to therapists and they'll talk to me about their therapists and what they've done, and I'm like that's useless. Like that doesn't provide any value to anybody. And so, but I think in the States sometimes though, to kind of reverse it, and again, States is massive. I think there's a lot of people that go to therapy, but I think I sometimes compare it, and again, generalization is that I think sometimes a lot of people go to therapy similar to like people having a personal trainer and then going eating a gallon of ice cream every night. It's they go to it, but they don't actually really put it into practice, and so they don't actually see the change and the impact that it's supposed to have. So I think it's like I think there's differences, but
Interesting. Yeah.
again, this is a very big generalization on both
Yeah.
sides.
Yeah. No, that's very fascinating. I think that in my experience, British culture does tend to be a little bit more non-confrontational, so I could see how that would carry over into to therapy or sort of, other professions. And then, is there anything you would in your mental health journey? I suppose you could have started earlier. Is there anything you would do differently now, like with the benefit of hindsight, whether it's and how you approached mental health, in the wake of your mother's diagnosis or any other quake event in your life?
Well, man, I wish I started therapy when my mother was going through cancer. That would have had a lot of help because,
Mhm.
I very much thought I could handle it, and I was very much compartmentalizing it. I didn't
Hmm.
want to cry in front of my mother because I knew that she was really nervous about, how was I feeling and all those types of things. And so, yeah, and I was helping my dad because my dad was there to support, and I obviously wanted to make sure that he wasn't taking the full burden of everything. So I wish that I started therapy earlier because I think it would have really
Hmm.
helped me. But also, not just about therapy, but the one thing that I really learned about that experience was that I didn't talk to anybody about it. So like my friends would ask me about my mom, I'd say she was fine, which was
Mm,
obviously ridiculous. And so,
yeah.
but now if say something like that was to happen in my life, one, I would be very open with my friends, be open with my loved ones, because the thing I've learned is that just because someone hasn't gone through what you've gone through does not mean they can't be there, does not mean they can't support you. And you need to let the people that are around you, friends, family, loved ones, be there to kind of help you. Now, the
Hmm.
only thing I will say is it might happen where there's people that you think might be there to support you that might not step up, partly
Oh,
because
interesting.
they're not equipped,
Hmm.
or also sometimes people scare away from like because all of a sudden
Big
it's like
feelings.
something, yeah, like they haven't dealt with stuff, so they kind of get scared and kind of pull away from it. And so it's interesting how certain people will kind of be there to really support you and some people won't. So that's just kind of some forewarning I'd say to people is like, don't look at that as a setback. Like there will be other people that will be there, but don't just internalize it. Don't take it on all yourself because fuck me, man, that just makes it a lot worse and a lot harder. And
Mm,
that's what happened with me. And I know that happens with a lot of other people. And that's not just from my mom going through cancer. That can be from anything happening in life. So that's a very any type of life situation happening. Now, this does not mean
mhm.
you need to go divulge your life to everybody on Earth, but
Yeah.
but,
Sir, this is a
but
Wendy's.
yeah, like you don't need to be one of those people on the subway talking about Jesus or something like that. But but the people that know you well and care about you,
They can confide in, yeah.
definitely, yeah, it's they can definitely be there to support and help.
Yeah, there's so one more question, and then I want to jump into some standing questions. You said something interesting about your, learning tools to help you deal with your dad starting to date again. And the reason why I bring that up is because it's sort of similar to something that I've been working through and a few other people in my circle have, but it's for a totally different reason, which is we have siblings or very close people that aren't our kids struggling with some sort of addiction. And the
Mm,
reason why I equate the two is because in both instances, you can't control your dad. I can't control my family member. So we
mm,
both sort of need tools to help us deal with other people and those sort of complicated feelings, right? So this isn't about necessarily say me dealing with frustration at work. It's more so about me dealing with frustration that another human being that I can't control is causing me. So I'm
sure.
curious if you could share just a little bit on any of the tools or frameworks that helped you sort of um, not bridge the gap because this was just I guess growing pains, let's call them, between your father and
Mhm.
yourself. Yeah, anything you can share to that?
Yeah, well, I'm trying to think back to it. There was just to kind of give more context and like what were the things that they were helping me with my father dating again, because to give
Mhm.
a little more detail on it. So one of them, and this might not be exactly what you're asking, but one of them was, um, and my dad's still with his partner. I love her.
Mhm.
We're super close. Like, so
Your dad's
it's
a great
all like,
man. I met him
yeah,
several
yeah,
times. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But my dad's close. I'm close to my dad's wife, like close to my dad's kids, her kids. So it's like, this is not a negative in any way, shape, or form. Cause I like, my dad couldn't have ended up with anybody, more perfect for him. So,
Good. I'm glad.
but at the time, one of the things I really struggled with was, when she started to, slowly move in, was like taking down things that like reminded me of my mother. So, whether that was, we had a lot of photos and stuff like that, family photos, or just like my mom had a very eclectic art taste and things like that. And so that was one of the big things, was like these material items that I was like clinging on to, that reminded me of my mom. And I got really angry about it because I was like, you're fucking taking things down and remind me of mom. Like, what the fuck? And now, funny enough, I live, I live in a flat by myself. And say tomorrow I was to have a girlfriend that moved in, I couldn't just be like, well, you have to move in with all my stuff. It's like, well, I'd have to be like, okay, well, we're going to take everything down off the walls and we'll buy stuff
That's a good.
together.
Wow, that's good. Yeah.
And so now looking back on it, like my dad wasn't being an asshole. He was, he had this woman who was moving into the house who he loved for, and obviously didn't want to move into a house with all my mother's shit in it. And so,
Or
at the
your shit, for
time,
that matter.
yeah, that too. And at the time I was like, what the fuck is this? And so he, is able to, this is one thing he's able to help me do, is really help me detach the value of a material item. So he was like, Corey, that you don't need these material items to remind you of your mother or to help someone understand who your mother is. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, Corey, he's like, you do a lot of things that your mother instilled in you. He goes, you like to cook, you like to entertain. He goes, all these things you do on a day-to-day life are your mom. And he goes, so those are the things you should be really thinking about. And he goes, Corey, I understand the photos you want. He's like, you can take the photos and make your own photo album of them. Uh, and then, and so, that was really the big thing, was just kind of detaching the value of the material item, but also being a little bit more understanding to my father. I would say in this situation, the big thing was with my dad and I was just open communication. So like my therapist giving me the tools as a young 26, 27 year old, who's emotionally charged, and having cool and calm conversations with my dad about what his actions have, what impact they have on me. But also being able to understand that, like, just because I have a conversation with him, it doesn't mean that it's going to change anything. So it doesn't mean that he is
Mhm.
going to change, but that at least I can get my feelings off my chest. But also that I need to be, and this is kind of now getting to the answer you're asking about, is that he also gave me the ability to realize that, like, your dad might be different now, and you might see him in a different light because your mom passed and it's now a different scenario. But Corey, you need to be able to understand that your relationship with him is might change, and it might not change in the way you want it to be. And you need to decide what you want that relationship to be with him. So, he can still be your dad, but are you going to be as close to him, or are you going to let this really impact you? And so, for me, obviously that was difficult. There was a moment where I didn't speak to my dad for a little bit, like a couple months, because I was just really frustrated. And also I needed, I think, some breathing room, and so did he, I think. And so, yeah, it was one of those things. There's things I could have handled better. There's things my father could have handled better, but my dad's an amazing man all around, like husband, father, friend, all of it. And I very much look up to him in many, many aspects of life. And also, like, my dad was equipped with very different skills and tools than I was. Like, he grew up very differently than I did. Different time, different, like my dad's father was, manic and all these things. So my dad really only has mom and a sister, and they grew up quite poor. So there's all these things that, like, I could never understand. So my therapist gave me the ability to like try to put myself in his shoes. So like one of the things, and some of this is coming back to me as we talk about it, I forgot the name of it, but my therapist basically had me almost speak to like myself. So basically like putting myself in third person, speaking to myself about my feelings and why is it bothering me. And
Mm,
then he made me do the same thing as if my father was sitting there and I was having a conversation with him. And it was interesting when he did that, how sometimes when he would do that, sometimes when I'd hear myself, I was like, oh, that's a little bit ridiculous. And
well, that sounds
so,
silly.
yeah, but
It's so, yeah.
I can't answer. I can't fully answer your question because obviously your scenario is a little bit different. But I think it's just so
No, no,
it's
it's a
like the
great
same thing
answer.
when your mother's passing, when your mother's going through cancer. It's very similar as well. You can't control it, and that's one of the
Yeah.
hardest parts about that. Is you're like, this is fucking bullshit. I can't fucking do anything. This is ridiculous. Um, and it's one of those things you just have to learn to get like you just have to get over it because if you don't it's just going to be absolutely horrible because this is one of those things you just can control it. So but that's life in many
Yeah.
scenarios in life. So not to dumb it down your question at all, but I think unfortunately it's a lot of people let it really get kind of take control over them.
hmm No, I think that's a fantastic answer. I think that that detachment is a really sort of good framework. I remember once, whenever I'm going through something difficult, I would say like, if my best friend or whomever was going through this exact problem, like, what would I advise them to do? And that's
Hmm.
sort of like heuristic is always, if not giving me clarity, then at least putting me on the path towards like diminishing its impact on me or its hold over me so I can think a little bit clearer, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
And so you mentioned earlier a book, and so I think I just want to go back to that. I don't know if it's that book or any other book, but you know, what books have helped you on your mental health journey?
Funny, I asked everyone this question. I should know this off the top of my head, but the one thing I'm horrible at is actually remembering titles of books. I don't know why. I have a friend
So,
Ben who can legitimately remember knowledge in books, like you, similar, same thing. Actually, I think I've introduced you to Ben.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
he's doing he's crushing it, man. He's in New York now. He's he got
yeah,
some yeah, he's a good guy.
you guys, I don't know how you remember so much knowledge from reading. It's unbelievable. But some of the books that do come to mind, some of them are actually new, but one of them is older. I'm actually looking over here because I have some books next to me. But there was one book that I remember reading. This was actually about relationship theory. It was, and I know a lot of people read this book, but I highly recommend it, called Attached, because I think it helps people understand how they are in relationships and things like that. Funny enough, when I started therapy, I shouldn't read any books until like after therapy. Then I was like, oh, I'm kind of into this whole mental health thing. so, I was
Corey,
like,
don't
oh,
read.
maybe this helps.
Yeah.
so, yes, I'd say that one. There's a book that I read recently about David Brooks called How to Get to Know Someone, and that book
Oh,
is
he's a
really
G.
interesting. Yeah, he has a great YouTube video as well. Amazing speaker, but the thing I love about him is it just really helps you truly understand the way people communicate and why we communicate differently and why we don't understand each other. And
Yeah.
it sounds very cheesy and very basic, but he gives some really good tools to be a little bit more understanding of other people, which is something that I can definitely be better at. And well, actually, I think something we can all be better at, especially
Yeah.
nowadays with everything going on in the world. Another one that I'm reading right now that my therapist just recommended to me because this new therapy called ACT, and I should remember the acronym, but I don't remember it off the top of my head right now. But it's like awareness something something, and but it's like the new version. It's the new version of CBT, pretty much.
Tight.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so she recommended a book called The Happiness Trap, and it's basically all about ACT. So for me, the books I like to read, I don't love reading, and there's nothing wrong with this. I don't love reading really fluffy mental health books. Like for me, I like
No one
stuff that
likes
are
a
true.
fluffer.
You never know. Listen, you might be in a place where you need something that's really uplifting and that makes you happy. Nothing wrong with that. But for me,
Sure.
I like reading books that give me tools so I can use my Kindle and highlight the shit out of it.
If you
And then,
highlight the whole thing, it doesn't count.
well, yeah, that's true. And so, but that's the thing. That's what I like. So the happiness trap, I think, is really good because it gives you really good tools when you're kind of, subconsciously thinking about things and you can't get yourself out of it. And it doesn't give you one size fits all tools. It gives you different tools to understand something, to also be compassionate to yourself in the moment. And I think it's a really great book. I highly recommend it. And then there's another author that I can't remember off the top of my head. Oh my God, it's really frustrating. There's a bunch of books that he like kind of, it's like a more philosophy type books, but is that one there? I can't remember if that's it. If that is Awareness.
Was it Man's Search for Meaning? Oh,
No,
Awareness
hold on.
by was it Tony DeMello?
Yeah, is that it? Is that? Hold on, I think I might have it here next to me. 1 second.
I think I might have it too, actually.
I do. Look at that. I do have a book. So yeah, this guy has some great books.
Anthony DeMello.
Yeah. Look at you,
bro.
He has a bunch of really good books. Awareness. This one, Awareness. It was a book I read a long time ago. I highly recommend it. And he has a bunch of other ones. He actually has a really good one about relationships and breakups and stuff, which I think everyone should read. And it talks about how, when you get out of a relationship, how you kind of go in this spiral. You're like, how can I live without this person? And maybe that's just me.
That just great. That's just every Drake album.
So those are just some of the key ones. That there's many books, but to me, I think those are the ones that I think are really good and also give you some really good life skills that you're like, if you read it and action it, I think can have a lot of impact. You
should send this out, to your mailing list or post it on the channel as well, because I think we saw some really good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, we do. We basically what we try to do, we try to collect them for a couple episodes, and then we put it under like one post.
I see. Yeah. Where, like on a video or on the site?
No, on our Instagram handle. So we'll put it as like a reel. So it'll be like, here's the books, here's the description about it.
Email it out too, dude, so that people can click the links and buy it.
Yeah, I don't have an email newsletter list. It's like it's on the list, man.
I feel it. Okay, so we talked a little bit. That was a very therapy specific question, but there's two sort of existential questions that you asked me that I want to ask you, and we're almost at time, so I want to make sure we get to them. The next one is, if you died tonight, what would you regret not doing besides not going to the Arsenal match versus Bayern?
I didn't even know who was playing. It's obviously funny you asked me this. So this girl that I'm friends with, Bora, she messaged me this morning being like, "Hey, I love your podcast," and she goes, "I love this question that you just asked me." And she actually took a WhatsApp screenshot. She sent it to a bunch of her girlfriends, and so she goes, "What would be yours?" And I was like, "Well, it's funny enough. I asked this question, but I never thought about it." And this is something that I've gone back and forth on my life, and like, do I want it or do I not? And I think one thing I would regret not doing is not having a kid.
I'm nodding because I think you brought that up a few minutes ago, and I think yeah, interesting. Well, you're coming out to California.
I'll have a lot of cousins. Your kids.
I have a lot of kids. Well, bro, you can't. You don't make tortillas. You don't cook tortillas, so it won't work for them.
That's fair.
But it's so interesting, and I'm kind of nodding because it's when you're forced to think about your choice in the construct of, like, you're dying, right? And you mentioned CBT earlier, and a lot of Stoic philosophy is based on this idea of like loving fate, meditating on death, and kind of using both of those as like forcing mechanisms to make tough decisions. And I remember earlier you were kind of articulating that you're not sure what if you want to settle down or sort of what you want. So it was interesting to hear you say that, because I think it's something that, as long as I've known you, you've thought quite a bit about in both directions. So I'm glad I'm curious what else will come from that. And all that is to say, I have a lot of cousins, so you can come live in California. And so the last question that I want to ask, again, like on the existential side of things, is, if the next couple of years were a chapter in a book, what would that chapter be for Corey Cummins?
The full name. I don't.
Yeah, social security number. Yeah, just kidding. Go.
I don't have a title for it, but I would say the things that I'm working towards, career-wise and personal-wise, I think are really kind of, for me, it's really setting the foundations for myself to live a more fruitful and flexible lifestyle. So, for me, from a career perspective, I want to have the ability to, be a little more flexible with my life and what I do and where I'm doing it and how I'm doing it. Partly, but that leads into the personal life, which is,
Yeah.
for me, like, as you know, I've never been probably taking the typical route that everybody has when it comes to dating and things like that. But I think for me, it's one of those things where, I think I would like to settle down, but for me, it's never at the sacrifice of settling down to settle down. It needs to be with the right person that kind of really matches with me. And I think so. I think for me, it's really kind of setting up the right things to enable me to live kind of the fruitful life that I want
Yeah.
professionally and personally. And part of that is, for me, I don't want to be stuck to the corporate life long term. And I want to make sure that, if I was to have a family, I could be there for them, like the way my father was. My father was an entrepreneur, but he was always there for us. Like, he was always at home for dinner and always home for our sports and all that type of stuff. And there's nothing wrong with the people I work with. I have some incredible bosses that are super successful, but when I see the hours and the amount of flying and traveling they do, I'm just like, I don't know how they do it with a family. And so I would say those are the key things for me. But I don't know. I struggle to sometimes meet someone that I really truly align with, especially, I don't know if you feel this way, but you've obviously had a wife for a while now, but going to therapy for a long time, I think sometimes I struggle to meet someone who's, kind of gone through that journey on and put in the time that I have. And, for me, that's something that's super important, because like, life doesn't get easier, life gets harder. And
Yeah.
so if someone isn't willing to put the
The
time
work.
and money, money and work into it, kind of makes it difficult. And so, for me, that's something that I sometimes struggle to kind of really, really align with on that side.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. It's a good note to end on because I think one of the things that my wife and I really matched up or aligned with was that we had both done a lot of work on ourselves.
Hmm.
And when her and I talk about mutual friends or or family members that are looking for that person, one of the first things we always bring up is like, yeah, I mean, they just haven't done the work yet. It's like to know
Hmm.
themselves or to like, be the best version of themselves that they can be for for someone else. And it's not to say that my wife and I are perfect. There's always things that we're working on, both as
Well,
individuals
she
and as a
is. You're
couple.
not.
Yeah, she's pretty awesome. She's the best. Um, so I think that's a really I think that's a very very good point. And in kind of hearing you as well, like I'm gonna throw another recommendation your way, book wise, from David Brooks. Have you read The Second Mountain?
I haven't.
It's about so it's been a while since I've read it, but it's essentially about if the first mountain is sort of like professional accomplishment, kind of getting you through your 20s, you know, uh, of money, fame, positional power, all that stuff. Then the second mountain is more so about building things based on values and build and based on like longevity. So like building a family or that next version of your work that can maybe impact other people, kind of like how you're doing with this podcast. So I think it raises some really good questions about what the important things are in life and how you might. And I think in hearing you, in these last few questions, I think it's a book that could really help you at this time, if at least not perhaps not answer those questions, but at least maybe think about them in a different way.
No, definitely. I have a lot of time for David Brooks. I love his YouTube and his book, so I'll definitely
He's
read
a
it. So
real
yeah,
one.
yeah, no,
Cool,
he's
man.
great.
Well, I'm no Corey Cummins, but I hope I did a decent job, and I think that listeners will really appreciate hearing your story, man.
No, I really appreciate it. I think we're gonna have to re-record the first one we did of yours and I now that we have some better audio on your side. But but
Fair,
no,
whatever you want.
I really appreciate it, and yeah, we'll see what people have to say about it. So thanks.
Dude, I love you, man. Always a pleasure.